Right, good afternoon everybody. We've moved from morning to afternoon. I'm going to take a slightly different tack and talk to you a little bit now about the recruitment process. So you're all here because you think you're interested in medcoms one way or another, and the last two presentations are starting to give you some idea, if you want to move into medical communications, which direction do you actually want to move into. So what I want to do now is just spend a few minutes just giving you a few hints and tips on how to present yourself as you go forward for a role in medical communications. Now, you're very lucky in that we've got a lot of agencies here today and you can talk to these people directly. Some of you have probably come with your CVs ready to hand over, and the recruitment process will kick off automatically from that. But I just want to give you a few hints and tips if you're not quite at that stage, or if you're not ready to move into medcoms yet, if it's going to be 6 months, a year, or a little bit further down the line. So, my name's Karen Kent, and I'm, like the others, I'm going to give you a little bit of history of how I moved into medical communications. So I started off with a PhD in veterinary microbiology. I then went on to do a number of postdocs in both animal and human infectious diseases, 9 years of which was working on HIV vaccines. So I had a very high-profile career within research. I was touring the world, talking about my own work. I was writing review articles that were commissioned. So I'd been there and I'd definitely worn that T-shirt. But I needed life to get a lot more flexible around family and a young daughter. So that's when I moved into medical communications as a medical writer back in 1998. So I've been in this business a long time too. Now, in fact, I was extremely lucky. Back then, maybe it wasn't quite as competitive to get into medcoms. I stepped straight into a medical writer role, and in fact, became managing editor within just 2 years. But I had got a number of years postdoc experience, and I was doing a lot of writing within those roles too. So as we've heard previously, the timescale can be a number of years to progress, or it can be relatively quick, depending on the experience you bring to the table. So I held in-house roles up until June of 2011. And that's when I stepped out of medcoms and became an independent consultant. In services to medcoms, I do a variety of things. But particularly today, I want to talk about recruitment, because for the last 2 years, I've also supported recruitment into medical communications. So, for all of you sitting out there, is medcoms the next rung on your career ladder? Is it really where you want to go? And if so, which direction do you want to go in? And from the last couple of presentations, you'll be getting a good feel now of the direction that you think you want to go in. Medical writing, medical editing, or account management. Peter alluded to this earlier. Which company is going to be right for you? And they are very different. Having been through a few myself, you get a feel for just how different they can be. Firstly, what location is right for you? There are 3 main hubs within the UK for medcoms, Oxford being one, London, and then the northwest, the Macclesfield, Knutsford area. On the medcoms networking site, Peter's got a great list of companies, and he's got most of those marked on a map across the UK. So in addition to those 3 main hubs, there are companies dotted around the country, and it's really worth having a look at that map to see where else you might want to target where you want to be. The size of the company is also important. Do you want a small niche boutique agency, or do you want to be part of one of these much, much larger global international corporations? They all have a different feel. And even in my experience within a large global corporation, sub-companies within that can feel very different as well. So it's just something for you to bear in mind. Also, what's the main focus of the work that you want? There are some agencies that are primarily focused on publication planning and publications and drafting manuscripts. Then there are others that focus mostly on the meetings, the monographs, and all the associated materials. And then there's others that sit somewhere in between. So if you, for example, you want to become a medical writer, do you want to focus mainly on publications, or do you want a much broader profile? And that will determine what sort of company you actually target. So getting that first job, how do you do it? We know from Peter's networking activities that the market now is highly competitive. There's probably 100, 120 of you here. There'll be a similar number in Manchester, similar again in London, and then there are other people beyond that that are interested in moving into medical communications. But there aren't roles for all of you. And there's a relatively small number of roles for those of you looking for them. So what have you got to do to get ahead of the competition? How can you stand out from the crowd? How are you going to do that? So what I want to do now is just give you a few pointers of how you can really present yourself as well as you can to hopefully give you an edge. So if we just start with your CV, this really needs to be as concise as possible, and generally a maximum of 2 pages. But if you're very proud of your publications record, that can go as an appendix. I know as a researcher, that list of publications is highly important to you. So if you want to attach that, then do so, but get the main core of your CV into 2 pages. I personally like to see a personal profile at the top of your CV. This is the hook. This is the thing that makes me want to read what comes next. What tells me really in 2 or 3 sentences who you are and what you've got to offer. I want to see that as tight and as succinct as possible. That really tells me you want this particular job. The next section is your work experience to date. And this really needs to focus on your transferable skills. And I'll just list these. We've heard a little bit about them already. It's less important as you move into medcoms what laboratory techniques you know. It feels really important to you in this moment in time, but you really need to draw out what are the skills that you have, that you've developed, that are really appropriate for medical communications. List your education. This is generally most recent first and in chronological order. Now I've put on the bottom here personal interests. Now this is entirely optional, and in fact some recruiters take it off. But I personally like to know that you've got a life outside of work. If you give me 1 sentence or 2 or 3 words about what you do outside of work, it really tells me a lot more about who you are. So that for me is really very important. So we've touched on some of these already, but we'll go through them again because these are the skills that you need to draw out of what you're currently doing that really might be very valuable for you in a medcoms role, be that account management, be that editorial, be it medical writing. So many of you here, probably most of you, have a very high level of scientific and medical knowledge. And you've gained that through your degree, your PhD, and your postdoc experience. For those of you that want to step up into a medical writing role, what are your writing skills like? Can you actually write well now? Do you like writing? We've alluded to this before. It's to really be a very successful medical writer and to have a long-term career, you need to like writing. Now, it just so happened that I got very, very good at writing, but I never really liked it, which is why I sort of moved on into other things. But if you foresee a career of 5, 10, 15 years in medical writing, you really need to like doing it. Also, do you have the versatility to adapt your style to a different range of audiences? Now, attention to detail, this is important in whatever role you take within MedComms, particularly medical writing and medical editing. Do you have a high level of attention to detail? There's an aspect here where actually being obsessive compulsive is actually a good thing. I'm in recovery, so I'm doing okay. We've alluded to the fact that some companies have an editorial team. The medical writer writes and the editor edits. But that's not the case in all companies. In some, you will write, you may have to edit your own work, or you may edit the work of somebody else. So it's also important that you hone those skills for the editorial function as well as the medical writing. There's always a level of project management, whatever you're doing. Can you multitask? Can you do 5, 10 jobs at the same time and keep all those balls up in the air? And can you manage your own time effectively? Because this is critical within MedComms. There isn't going to be somebody chasing behind you all the time, and if they are, they're probably going to be quite cross. So the interpersonal and the communication skills are important in all aspects, particularly if you're going to be on client side. You really need to be able to build relationships with your colleagues and with clients. You really need to be a team player. Are you flexible in your approach to your work? There's no place for being jobsworth in this industry. And sometimes you need to work outside of 9 to 5:30. Does your lifestyle allow that? Because it's going to be demanded of you, and especially if you start to travel. You need to be creative in the way that you think. A lot of what you do will involve design, artwork, web-based work. And this is where the words within the pictures start to matter. Have you got that eye, that creative eye for the artwork and how the words sit within the pictures? And are you proactive? Do you need a kick up the backside to make you do what you need to do? Or do you get out there and have a look at what needs to be done and just get on and do it? So these are all skills that you need to bring to the table. So it's time to apply for that first job. The recruitment market has sort of changed in this area over the last 18 months or so, largely due to opportunities like this. And a lot of companies that are here today will recruit at entry level directly. The jobs very often get posted on their websites. And in fact, the specialist job board, nextmedcommsjob.com, also lists entry-level roles. You're here today, so you're taking advantage of this networking opportunity. And we also need to remember the role of social media. That has a big place to play now in recruitment and seeing what jobs are out there, perhaps less so at entry level, but certainly at higher levels. So the medical writing test. If you're going forward for a medical writing role, you're going to be asked to do a test. This is going to be the first thing that happens after a company looks at your CV and says, yes, we quite like the look of you. So the purpose of that test is to really measure and get an understanding of your scientific knowledge, of your general writing ability, and even your commercial writing ability. And your work in that test will be reviewed for content and interpretation of the data, how appropriate the article is for the audience that you've been asked to write for, and your use of English. For those of you interested in medical editing, you'll be asked to do an editing test. And this will particularly look at your general use of English, your ability to copy, edit, and proofread, and the two functions are different. And you may even be asked to have a look at how words fit on a page that's been laid out ready for print. So the eye for design and layout also becomes important, especially for the production editorial route that you might choose to go down. So what happens after the writing or the editing test? And it's probably fair to say that if you don't meet the requirements of the company with the writing test, that's the end of your application. So that test is critical. If you don't pass that, you're not going any further. But if you are lucky enough to deliver an excellent test and the company want to interview you, that's the next stage to face. So you need to be really knowledgeable about the role that you've applied for. Peter alluded to the fact that medical writers seem to have a broadly similar role in all of the companies, but it's really important to look at the job description for each company and also know as much as you can about the company where your application has gone, because those two factors will really define what medical writing means in that company. And then it's also important to be aware of the various industry guidelines. So, a couple of tips for when you're actually at interview. You need to be confident enough so that those interviewing you know that you're really capable of doing the job. But actually, you also need to be humble enough so they understand that you can take the constructive criticism that's required as you learn the ropes and as you settle within the role. It is going to feel very different. Some of you will be quite established in your scientific career. You're writing your own papers. You're recognized for what you do. Medical communications is a service industry. You're there to deliver what the client wants, to their timelines, their brief, and their budget. And there can be a sense of losing yourself, losing who you were as that independent scientist as you become a medical writer. So that's really something that you need to think long and hard about. Are you prepared to make that transition? It's challenging when it happens, but if you're prepared to go with it, there is a very rewarding career that comes afterwards. So just a bit tongue-in-cheek, you will get red pen on your work to begin with one way or another, be that hard copy or the more modern electronic version of track changes. So that's a reality, that's something that you're going to have to get used to in those early days of being a writer. So I just throw out a question here to the agencies as well as the rest of you. With many companies recruiting directly, is there still a role for recruiters in this changing landscape? As a recruiter, I hope the answer is yes, but it is changing and it is evolving. So a question to all of you now, how can a recruiter such as myself actually help you in this process of finding that first role within medical communications? So someone like me who has a lot of experience in the industry can offer you an overview of the medcoms industry. A lot of you are getting that now, but there'll be people away from here that perhaps aren't getting that overview. We can provide guidance on the medical companies to approach, the companies that will suit you personally and your career aspirations. A lot of you will know how to set up your own CV, but others may need or feel they would like a little bit of help. One of the things I can offer is assessment of a practice writing test or an editing test and give you very detailed feedback. We've discussed the critical role of the medical writing and editing test, and if you get one practice with very sound guidance on how to do it better, you stand a much better chance when you come to do a live test for a company. Now, what I will never do is assist you in any of those live tests. So we can also offer, for those of you applying directly, assistance with job applications and help you a little bit when it comes to the interview process as well. So I think now for entry level in particular, there's a need for a different kind of recruitment service. You're here today because you're interested and you're getting to meet people from the medical communications agencies. What I'm prepared to do is offer a service of orientation and writing and editing test practice, but there's going to be a fee attached. In the traditional way of recruitment, there's lots of jobs, not many candidates, and the companies pay the recruiters. When the companies recruit directly, we need to be in a changing landscape. I'd also like to say to the MedComms companies here present that I would really welcome the opportunity to assist you in finding high caliber entry-level candidates. So just to close, this is me, these are my contact details, and if you've got any questions, I'd be delighted to answer them.